Good day, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this installment of our Behind the Scenes series. I'm your host, Bené Croft. I'm the Field Marketing Manager for the Americas region, and today we're going to be taking an in-depth look into the integrated reasoning section of the exam, or what we affectionately call IR. Our experts today are going to talk about what the section is, what it's comprised of, why it was added to the exam, and then explore how it's used during the admissions process. So there can be a lot of ambiguity around this section. I meet people all the time who ask questions like, do admissions take this section seriously? Should I study for it? If so, how long? Hopefully, this event will give you some insight to be able to answer some of those questions and figure out your best prep strategy moving forward. Before we get started, though, I have a few housekeeping notes. One, we want to hear from you. So we always do surveys every month. So if you pop over to mba.com/surveys, that's mba.com/surveys, answer 2 to 3 short questions. Shouldn't take you more than a minute. You can do it right now if you want. We just like to get candidate feedback and to make sure we're continuing to bring the events and the information that matters most to you. So that's one. Secondly, we want to answer your questions today. That's what you came for. You had some interest in this subject, but we want to make sure we get your questions answered. So we're going to talk amongst ourselves, I'll say about 30 minutes, give or so. At the end of that, any question that you ask, which we will ask that you pop into the comment section. If you're watching on YouTube, post your question to the comment section. At the end, we'll try and get to as many as we can within the hour. If we end a little soon, then we end a little soon. We'll see how it goes. So those are my 2 notes, mba.com/surveys, and make sure you throw your questions in there. If you have a question now, put it in. Something comes up as we're talking, go ahead and add it there. I'd like to introduce our guest today. So we have Eileen Talento Miller. She is a senior psychometrician here at GMAT. And if you don't know what a psychometrician is, I can't tell you really, but they are the ones who make this exam tick. So she's going to be a wealth of information as it relates to that section itself, how it was designed, what you can expect from it, etc. We also have Christy St. John. She's the admissions director for the MBA program over at Vanderbilt. So she's going to give us some perspective from the admissions community. She can't speak to every single school, but she can give us some general ideas of how it's used in the process from her perspective and what she knows of her colleagues in admissions. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello, thank you.
We'll get some good insights going. So let's go ahead and hop in. Tell us, Eileen, in layman's terms, what does integrated reasoning mean?
Well, when we talk about integrated reasoning, we define it as how well you integrate data to solve complex problems. Basically, the goal of integrated reasoning was to provide problems that more closely resemble real-life scenarios. In real life, when you get a question, when you have a problem, it's not going to be strictly defined one thing at a time. The integrated reasoning questions that you'll get will have more of the types of if, ands, and buts that you see in real life problems in our daily lives.
Nice. Okay. So from what I understand, and that was before my time at GMAT, the exam had 4 sections. We had 2 essays. You got the verbal and you got the quant. Why was this section created in the first place and added to the GMAT exam?
Well, this was before my time too, but the first GMAT exam, or the first admissions test for graduate study in business, was given in 1954. So you can imagine if we kept the test the same, it wouldn't be appropriate. The world has changed, business has changed, and business schools have changed. So in the decades that we've had the GMAT exam, it's gone through several evolutions. And this time, for this one, the idea for integrated reasoning came from the schools themselves. They told us what they needed for their 21st century classrooms. And that's what we have, a 21st century test to deal with 21st century business.
Okay. So tell us how this section is structured.
The integrated reasoning section allows you 30 minutes to answer 12 questions. There are 4 different question types, and each of the question types measures a different ability. A couple of the question types are self-explanatory. For instance, you have a table analysis question, which ask you questions about a table. You have a graphics interpretation question, which asks you questions about a graphics. But even though it sounds simple, the questions are a lot more complex than just looking up things on a table. For instance, the graphics interpretation questions doesn't have your typical bar or pie charts. It has a different type of graphic than what you're used to seeing on standardized tests that requires a lot more interpretation. For the tables themselves, you don't just look up something in the table. You actually have to make comparisons among the data, across the data. One of the other questions types is called multi-source reasoning. And again, that it says what it is. You have to look at multiple sources of data to answer the question. You have several different tabs of information that you can go back and forth between. And those tabs could include text, it could include tables, it could include graphs. And again, you have to integrate the information in order to find the correct answers. The last type of question is called a two-part analysis. Now, it sounds like you just have a question and you have to give two answers, which is really a really simplistic way of looking at it. I was a former math teacher, and so the way I look at it is this. If you have an equation, an algebra equation in two variables, say x plus y equals 17, there's an infinite number of combinations that could be. The key to knowing what the answers are, and I say answers because you have to know both of them, is the relationship between those two variables. And so you're given something and some additional information, but you can't just figure out one answer. You have to figure what both of the answers at the same time and how they're interrelated in order to find the unique solution.
What I like about that is that I think it speaks to the general business world, right? Any problem that we're thrown, we're rarely ever given a problem that is 1 + 2 = 3, because it probably wouldn't be a business problem to solve. There are all these different aspects that correlate and interrelate, and really figuring out how those pieces work together to ultimately solve the problem is what we're doing every day. So I like the way you explained it, and that's what this section is really getting to. Christy, so how do you use the IR score in the admissions process?
Well, as everyone probably knows, in the first year that it came out, the schools didn't know what to do with it. So we've been keeping data every year as to how people are doing. And then we also do an analysis with GMAT to verify what our assumptions were on that. In other words, if the person has a medium quantitative score and a really high R score, then we're going to say they're going to be able to do the reasoning that they need to do to get through the coursework here. If they've got a low IR score and a low quant score, the GMAT verifications at the end of the year have proven that they are going to struggle. And so this gives us something to look at early in the process. If we really love someone and want them to be in the program, we're going to give them a lot of quantitative work to do before they get here so that we can keep them here. That's the whole idea. And so we can use that. A lot of times people just run through the quant things and they're not paying attention, or maybe they leave a lot blank because they spent too much time on one, but they can make up for it on the quant part. And we will look at that. We'll look at if there's a huge gap between the verbal score and the quant score, then we're going to say, okay, you've got 96 percentile on the verbal and a 30% on the quant and a 7 on the IR. So that gives us the confidence to know that you're going to be able to analyze, to reason, to do a logical assessment of material. You just messed up somehow in the quant part. And so we would either have you do some extra quant work, or maybe say, hey, why don't you go take this again and try to do a better score on the quant, because we know that you can do it. That doesn't matter so much for us as far as what your end score is going to be, but it might matter if you're going into the business world, because some companies want to know what your total GMAT score is. The triage with some of them. But for us, for strictly admissions, we'll look at it, and if you've got a low quant score and a low IR score, we're going to say, you really need to do a little bit of studying and see if this is really the career path that is going to be right for you. somebody tells us they want to go into finance or into consulting and they can't analyze data, that's really not a good start.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I like what you're saying, and I've heard other admissions directors speak to that. What you're, I think in a nutshell, saying is that you're taking those section scores and gathering further insights about the candidates. So sometimes I can talk to candidates and they're so fixated on scores or a particular score. And while those are good, it's really the insights that you're gaining and how you're making interrelations between one score versus another. Or I've heard some say that they're looking at candidates who don't have a ton of work experience. They may look at that IR score a little, put more weight on it. So I think it could vary based on the person's situation, the admissions team, what they're looking for. But there are insights that are gained, and it's not just about the score itself. It's about how the pieces work together.
Exactly, because they tell us something about how you go about reasoning. And a lot of times, I know for the first few years, people were not even bothering to do or they'd start it and not finish it. They said, oh, this doesn't really matter. And you get really low scores in. And so after several years of having this on the test and having great study materials for it through GMAT and other agencies, we think that if you've got a really low score on that, we'll sometimes call candidates and say, what were you doing? What happened here? And if they say, oh, I just didn't have time to do it, so I just left it, well, okay, fine. But we might give them, again, some other work to do before they got here to make sure that they can do it.
Great insight. So Eileen, how's it scored? So how's it scored? What's the difference between the other sections? Give us the full rundown of what is a part of this IR score.
Absolutely. One of the things that's interesting about this section is that most of the IR questions require multiple responses. For instance, I described the two-part analysis that requires two answers. But the thing about it is, if you don't know the answer to the one, you can't get the answer to the other one. And so you have to get all pieces of the question right in order to get the problem right. Because if you don't, then you're not showing that you're integrating the reasoning. You're not demonstrating what we're trying to measure. And this also reduces the possibility of someone just getting lucky and guessing. So we're really measuring your ability, not your ability to take the test. One of the differences between IR currently and the verbal and quantitative sections is that the verbal and quantitative sections are adaptive and the IR section is not. So you might think that the score is just based on, the number correct, but that's not actually accurate. Like the adaptive sections, you do get credit for the difficulty of the questions that you answer. And again, this is a fairness question because if somebody has mostly easy questions on their section, they're not going to get an advantage over somebody who has mostly difficult questions. So the difficulty of the questions is taken into account. Now, the scores themselves, for the verbal and quantitative sections, the scores range from 0 to 60, and that has been that way, like I said, since 1954. We kept those scores the same so that they could be compared across time. But now we've got this brand new section. And so why don't we put it on the 0 to 60 scale? Well, the answer is pretty easy. It's because it's different. It's a different section. It's a different test. It shouldn't be compared to the verbal and quantitative section. Forget the fact that, well, not just the fact that there's a different number of questions, there's a different time limit, so it shouldn't be the same score. But the concept of it is different. For instance, the integrated reasoning requires both verbal and quantitative. In some cases, you have to do both things in the same question. And like Christy said, if you haven't been able to show it in one section, you can show it in the IR section. And so that's the beauty of having these separate scores, is that the admissions folks and you yourself can show your strengths in the different areas. Okay, so maybe I didn't get as high a score as I wanted on the quantitative section, but I can show that I can do quantitative reasoning together with verbal reasoning by having a high IR score.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. Christy, do you evaluate that IR score in a different way than verbal and quant?
No, we actually look at it as, well, as Eileen said, and the word is perfect for this, it's integrated. Can you integrate both written material that has to go into a quantitative format, or can you take a quantitative format like graphs, tables, etc., and turn that into an explanation verbally? So if you can do both, then your skill set should be fairly transparent to us. Again, I think that people, I know that a lot of the applicants tend to worry so much about the GMAT score. The GMAT score, one part of it or all parts of it, is not going to be what keeps you out, and it's not going to be what gets you in. There are lots of other things, but the reason we do want the GMAT, and we want you to have as good a score as you can get on the GMAT, is because if you're admitted to our program, we want you to be successful. There's nothing worse than having someone come in who has told us, and please don't ever put this on your essays, I just want you to know that the GMAT score does not represent my abilities. Well, yes, it does. I'm sorry, it really does. And that's what we test. That's why we do the verification with GMAT every year. If you don't like your first score, sure, you could have had extenuating circumstances. Go back and take it again. Don't just be happy to send in one low score when you know the schools that you're targeting have an average that's much higher. We don't do that just to look good in rankings. We do that because we know the minimum score it takes to get through our curriculum. And each school is a bit different in how the curriculum is presented and how what study materials, what support groups you have. So every school is different in that. But that's the one thing we all want. We want the candidate to come to succeed. And this test helps us decide that. But again, it's not going to be the thing that gets you in. It's not going to be the thing that keeps you out. There's so much more to it.
Absolutely. I want to piggyback off of something that you said about knowing what score is going to, is likely to succeed in your program. And I talk about this during sessions all the time, that schools that participate in our validity studies, they get data that gives them insight to know and is it a perfect science? No, but it's something that they can go off to say, anyone who scores below this benchmark, they may struggle. And we may know that anyone who's at this point or higher, we might not have to worry about them academically. So let's focus on the other components. Exactly. And so that's the insight that this exam is providing, on top of those nuances that Christy described in terms of they might be able to handle this, looks like they're low here, but this gives me an indication of something else. Same way with all the other factors that they're going to add into the application process. So really, they're just trying to get a clearer understanding of who you are. They don't have a ton of touch points to meet you and to interact with you. They have to make as best a decision as they can given the information that they're provided. And the GMAT is a way to do that. So it's not this thing, I tell people all the time, and I know I sound hokey, but it's not designed to keep you out of a program. It's actually designed to prepare you. And as Christy said, maybe you learn through the process that I'm going in a direction and maybe I should shift a little bit or modify as I'm going into this experience. So you're going to spend a lot of time in these programs, a lot of money perhaps. So let's make it a best fit for everyone involved. And that's just going to benefit you on the long run. So that's my soapbox there.
No, I mean, I agree with you 100%. And it's something that we do every year. We do the validity study. And the GMAT is not just some arbitrary barrier that you have to jump over before you get into B school. It has a purpose. And as you mentioned, Fanad, that studying for it is going to help you get ready for what you're going to find in B school. That's exactly the kind of problems you're going to be getting. Not all of them, but certainly the stuff on the IR. You're going to be getting that because the IR, I believe I'm right in this, it was developed by B-school faculty as well as some corporate recruiters, correct?
That's right. That's right. When they told us, when we heard what the schools wanted, then we specifically designed these item types. And surveys with corporate recruiters have told us that they're right on target in terms of what they're looking for the business students coming out of business programs to be able to do.
Correct.
Eileen, how should a prospective student prepare for this section? That's sometimes, I think, the challenge. People don't know how to approach this or how to think about it.
Well, you know, like Christy said, we made these items from scratch, and so the students haven't seen them on any other test that they may have taken before. And so I would recommend spending more time preparing for these types of items, not just the types of items and not just the content on the items, but also the way they're presented and the features that are available through them. So, you know, when you get in the test day, you know, they are real life types of questions. So you might think, oh, it's going to be easy to answer them, but you want to go through the features. You want to know how the questions are going to present themselves, how to go through each of the tabs to find the information in the multi-source reasoning. You need to know that when you have the graphics interpretation question, your answers are going to be in drop-down boxes. So you're not spending extra time, valuable time, just figuring out how to answer the question instead of figuring out what the answer to the question is. So one of the things you need to worry about specifically is that timing. It's 12 questions for 30 minutes, but they're complicated questions. They're complex questions. Mm-hmm. And so you need to be careful about your timing. And so you need to take advantage of the features that are available on the screen and so forth. For instance, with the table analysis questions, you can sort the tables. So you need to know how that sort feature works and practice with that sort feature so it's second nature and you're not spending extra time on that. There's an on-screen calculator. And so that's going to save you time definitely if you know where it is and how to get to it. And so, you know, timing is going to be key, making sure you're familiar with the content. The skills themselves, they're everyday skills, like Christy said, like Fanae said. So hopefully that'll be second nature to most of you. But one of the things about testing in general is to not stress out. You know, make sure you're familiar with the information, trust your abilities, and just take a deep breath and do the best that you can.
I always advise students because I know how nervous they get. I'll tell them, you know, first of all, do lots and lots of practice tests.
Yep.
Just the more familiar you are with how things work on it and the fact that, oh, I can't go back a page. I have to keep going forward. Once you get over that, you can do it. If you know, go out and do meditation or go for a run, whatever is going to relax you before you go in, because if you're stressed, you're not going to be able to focus. And focus is the real key to a successful result on the GMAT. You can't have odd things going on in your brain like, I'm not going to be able to do this, I can't finish. If you've got that in your brain, you're not going to finish. So just clear your head and relax and breathe deeply and go into it, but prepare before you get there.
It's funny. One of the things I used to tell my kids when they were preparing for their standardized tests is to, before you go in, do some jumping jacks, because you've got all this energy, you know, and nowhere to release it except for that anxiety, you know. So do some jumping jacks. Like I said, take a deep breath, do some meditation, whatever helps you, because what you want is for your ability to show, not your anxiety.
Love that. I am going to steal it. What you want to show is your ability, not your anxiety. But it's such a real factor. And I think even just speaking to it, a lot of times people don't think about that part or don't consider that part, that my anxiety may impact my performance. I think even the awareness of that could really help you, and you might channel it into jumping jacks or meditation. But just knowing that it will be there, you're not crazy. That's just what it is, accepting it, and then how you're going to deal with it. Drinks, snacks, jumps, whatever it is. But I love that. And I'm stealing it, like I said. Christy, I know you talked about this a little bit, But go further into it about how you've seen those IR skills translate. You mentioned that what you're doing in the IR section, you may do in the classroom. Can you go into that in a little more detail, and even in your postgraduate life, how you see those skills show up and the correlation you see there between the two?
The first thing I think is that you need to realize that things are not in a silo. You don't go in and do, okay, this is finance. We're going to do only finance here. Now I'm going to do marketing. And now I'm going to do operations, or whatever it might be. All of those work together. And if you have worked, which most people in MBA programs have, you're going to know that, for example, I'm in the marketing area. I come up with a great idea to repackage an old product that's not selling well. I can't just go out there and say, okay, here's my design, let's do it. First of all, you've got to work with the operations people. They have to refinish or reset all their machines. You have to talk to the finance people to find out, how much is this going to cost, and do I have it in my budget? You have to do some focus groups to see if what you like is what the outside people who are going to buy your product will like. And all this data comes in, and you have to put it all together. And so nothing is in a silo. Everything, every part of a business works together at some point in time or another. And so if you can show on the IR that you know how to do that, you're golden. You will be able to do that and lead your teams to find great answers to problems. And that's what happens in business school, but it also happens in the real world.
Got it. Okay. Is there any significance about the section that you could think of that says, if you do this or you perform in this level, that it carries more weight than any other? I think you've addressed that, but I just want to make it clear for anyone listening to understand how that factors in.
Well, again, if you have studied for this or prepared for this part of it and you do well on it, that's going to give us the confidence to say, okay, maybe your score is a little less than what we want here, but we think you're going to be successful in the program. And so everything else being equal, we like you, you've got good interpersonal skills, et cetera, and the fit, we will admit you. If we have any question at all, though, you've got a low score there and a low quant score, and you tell us that you want to go into consulting, we're going to say, let's have a reality check first. That might be a case when you're going to be put on the wait list, and we will call you up and talk to you about this. Because we want to understand what makes you think you want to go in this direction. What skills do you think you already have? And if you're not demonstrating that you have those skills, it's going to be very difficult for you. So I think reality check is part of what the candidate should be doing as well. If the school is not going to reach out to you, and a lot of times they won't. A lot of times you'll just be put on a wait list and you just sit there and try to figure out what's going on. Well, be honest. Look at your scores, look at your transcript and say, okay, if I were really looking at this and I wanted to get the best student in my program, would I want me?
Yeah.
What do I need to fix? And fix it.
Yeah. I love that. That's great insight. And Christy speaking to, I think that many of the areas of the exam are relevant to many disciplines, many functions, but specifically you mentioned consulting, as that is one function or discipline that will, not all companies, but some may ask to look at your GMAT exam score and gain some more insights about you and who you are and your abilities through that score. So that's not the only discipline where it matters, but it is one that they may take a look at that score, even once you matriculated through your program. So we want to think about those things. But this has been great. We're right about 30 minutes. So I'm going to throw to the audience, see if we have a few questions. Some we may have addressed. There's a question from Amara asking, she knows there's plenty of study material for the GMAT. Is there any study material that you would strongly recommend? Also, how many hours do you suggest preparing for it? I can start with that. We have various products. We have our GMAT prep tests, which are going to be your best going to give you the best insight on your performance on the exam itself. It'll give you access to questions. It's going to simulate the exam. It'll have the same scoring algorithm. So those are going to be a staple, or they probably could or should be a staple in your preparation. But then we also have a tool specifically about the IR section that'll give you more practice with questions as they relate to IR. So that's one tool that we offer. There are other companies, prep companies, who will have materials that you can use as supplements. There are courses specifically about IR. Some companies have online programs that may be about a specific section as opposed to going through the entire GMAT section itself. One thing I always recommend is digging into the material on your own for a while first, just so you can understand what you actually need, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, where you find yourself getting hung up, because from there, you can make an informed decision on the type of help you need. I know many people who say, oh, I'm going to take the GMAT exam. Let me go sign up for this $1,200 course because I heard it's cool. And the thing is, those courses, they have different styles. They have different formats. Maybe you're a person who really needs someone to help you refresh yourself as it relates to foundational skills. Maybe you're someone who just really needs structure and discipline as it relates to studying the material. And all of the resources available to you are going to be strong in different areas. So it's going to be up to you to really get a clear understanding of what you may need so that you can pick the right approach, whether that's a tutor, course, etc. Any other thoughts?
Fanae, I'd like to piggyback on something you said, and that is that you don't have to spend a lot of money on test prep in order to successfully prepare for the test. Like you said, you really need to know your strengths and your weaknesses, and you can do that with some of the free materials. You can do that with, Khan Academy and stuff like that, which is available free to do your basic some of the basic quantitative skills. So one of the things that the research shows, it's not necessarily the number of hours that you put in. It's going to be the quality of the prep that you do. And again, that doesn't take a lot of money. And in some cases, it might not even take a lot of time. Just maybe some self-awareness, some really deep looking into paying specific attention to what it is that you're studying. The one thing that I do, I said it before when I talked about the prep for the IR section, is that the most essential thing is not to walk into that test cold, to know what everything's going to look like so that you're not wasting time. And that's, timing is one of the things. When you look at people who take the test more than once, for instance, the people who do better the second time are usually the people who didn't use their time wisely the first time. And so the research shows that, and that's where prep is really going to help you, being familiar with each of the screens, being familiar with how to go through the cases. In the case of IR, being familiar with the extra features that are going to help with your timing. And like I said, I would recommend not spending a lot of money, but like Fanae said, being really careful about how you use your time and how you use your money for your prep materials. Again, one more thing about the GMAT prep is that is free, because we want you to show us your ability. So make sure you use every bit of that you can before you decide you need to spend some money on prep. That's just my personal feelings about that.
I could not agree more.
Yeah.
Yep. And I see people do it all the time. Just want to make sure we note that people study for this exam on their own all the time. I was on a webinar last night with a group called Forte. There was someone on who I think she went to Wharton. I'm not exactly. Yeah. She got a great score, and she took it all on her own. It took her 7 months. It might take you 3 months. It's really just going to depend on where you are. So do business schools consider IR scores, or do they only consider quant and verbal? I think we addressed that, right? Yep. How many times can I take the official GMAT exam? You can take the exam 5 times within 12 months. So that is you can take it 5 times within 12 months. There is also an 8-time testing limit. That's over the course of your lifetime. Sometimes I say that and people are like, what? Only 8 times? But when we instituted that, I think it maybe impacted 2% of test takers who really take the exam that many times. If you throw all test takers in a pot, people are testing for various reasons for various programs. But if you throw them all in one pot, the average number you'll get is 1.7 or 1.8. So on average, people are taking it twice or less.
And again, to repeat a little bit about what I said earlier, is that the people who take it a second time don't necessarily get a better score. It's usually the people who retake it for a reason. The reason is usually they know they can do better. So it's not necessary to continue to take it. That doesn't mean that you're going to get a better score.
Right. Smart test. This lady, smart people design it. Yeah. So it's really accurate though. When you have really prepared for the exam, it's going to give us the information that aligns with your true ability. So once you've maxed out, you've done it. So put your best foot forward on the front end. I know so many people that say they use it as a test run. I just want to see how I feel about the exam. Let me go take it. That's what the practice tests are for. And we have 6 of them. So
why don't you just go and light up $300 and burn it? That's just doesn't indicate very good sense to me. And now some people who walk in and haven't studied for it may do really well. They're rare though, I think. Most people have to prepare for it because it's just, well, as Eileen was saying, you've got to know what's on there and how to get around, how to maneuver through the test. And that can take up a lot of your time when you need to be focusing on finding the answer.
That's right. Yeah. Why does this section allow the use of a calculator? One of the questions.
My background actually before I came to GMAT was I was a math teacher. And so I'm really good at the math questions on the GMAT. But the thing about looking at, I've been with GMAT for 15 years now, and I've looked at a lot of quant questions and a lot of IR questions actually, and none of them require the use of the calculator. And in fact, some of them might get in your way. The example that I use a lot of times is with radicals, square roots. People want to calculate a square root, but a lot of these questions ask you to manipulate the square root, and you can't do that with a calculator. And so on the IR section, it's just, again, the reason why it's allowed is because it's just more real life. You know, these questions are designed to be more real life. It's not necessarily helping you, but it does make you feel more comfortable. It might, for those, you know, in my case where I was a math instructor, and so it's actually easier for me to do a lot of things either with by just not guessing, but estimating, and I'll estimate the answer rather than calculating, or I can do quick calculations in my head because I've been doing it for a long time, but it doesn't require the use of a calculator. And like I said, in some cases, on the GMAT quant section, in some cases it would get in your way, and I've seen that with like I said, when I helped my kids with their standardized tests before they went to college. But because the IR section is designed to be more real life, it's just one of those things that that makes you feel more comfortable, and it's there if you would like to use it, but you don't actually have to use it.
Okay. Question, Christy. How would you evaluate the applicant's other qualities or skills, such as interpersonal skills?
Well, that's why we have an interview, as well as a video essay. And I think a lot of schools are using video essays now for various purposes. Some schools actually will have you do like a case question, or they might ask you something fairly difficult. Other schools, like our school, we're just asking a question that is very light, that we want to see how you're going to react to a question that you have not prepared in your brain, and how are you going to present yourself on this particular camera. Because a lot of companies now are doing video interviews before they invite you out. We like to see Okay, are you looking at the camera? Are you going like this and like this? Um, so how are you acting in that part? The other part is through the interview, and our interviews are more conversational. But again, I know that there are some schools that will have faculty doing interviews, and they will give you a case interview, and it might be a little bit hard. But just remember, take a deep breath, repeat the question, and give your best shot at it. There's sometimes not a right answer. But what we're trying to decide, number one, are you the kind of person we would want to put in front of our top recruiters? Are you a likable, interesting human being? Doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert. Just are you capable of talking and having social intercourse? The second thing is for us, because we're small, we want to know, are you going to fit into our culture? Because there are lots of business schools and every business school has a different personality. And that's one thing that all candidates should know. What you might feel at one school, you won't find at another. So go and visit them. And that's the purpose of our interview. And so that's how we evaluate the interpersonal skills. And we try to as well do a reality check. It's what you say you want to do within the realm of possibility. Where did you get this idea if there's absolutely nothing in your background that suggests that you have ever had an interest in it? Where did that come from? So that's, again, what the interview is for. That answer the question?
Yep, I think so. Questions about preparation again. Is there a recommended period of time that you should prepare before you take your first exam?
So I would say that that's going to differ for every person. Mm-hmm. But it's just like Christy said, you don't want to go in there and throw away $300. You want to make sure that you're familiar with the exam. And so in some cases, that's all one person might need. They might be able to take I would say go through the GMAT prep, take the practice exam, the first practice exam, see if there's something on that first practice exam that you think you can do better, and then go through the rest of the prep. Take the second practice exam, and if that might be enough for somebody. That might be, a couple weeks of preparation. For somebody else, they might take that first practice exam, say, oh, you know what, I really need to brush up on my quant skills. And for that person, like you said, Fanae, it could be 7 months before they decide to take the exam for the first time. It's all going to be personal preference and really about what you think you can do in that time. I would say that there's probably a limit of how much preparation is a limit of how much is going to do you any good. Mm-hmm. At some point, more preparation is not going to help you. So, so that's what I, it's not a one size fits all, but definitely, you definitely just need to go through and see, take that first practice test and see where you are, and then go from there.
Agreed. And what Eileen is speaking to with taking that first practice test, you'll get a score, but what's probably more important than the score is the diagnostic. So it'll tell you the percentage you got right versus wrong on all the question types. It'll let you know about your timing and pacing. It'll give you that same insight on a per section basis. And that can give you a starting point, because I know I get that question all the time, and I'm sometimes, I hate that there's no answer that I can give. So I usually just default to data. So when anyone asks me that question, on average, if you lump in all the test takers, that 4 to 6 weeks is what the average amount of time people spend before taking the exam. The fact is, though, you may need 7 months, or someone may need 3 weeks, but everyone's starting from a different foundational point, and all of that matters. And the only way you'll know is by digging in, interacting with the material, taking that practice test, as Eileen stated, and then going from there. But at least gives you some place to start, because I know it's overwhelming. You have so many materials, so many resources online. You got this big book. Like, where do I start here? So take that exam, and hopefully that'll give you some insight, and you can say, kind of strong here, maybe I'll spend a little less time here. I need to take a full step back as it relates to problem solving questions, and let me start there and take another exam and see if I'm making some gains. And if you are, keep going. If you're not, the more you interact with it, it'll start to give you that insight of, I know where I need to go next. Maybe that's con. Maybe that's a bunch of researching on the internet. You'll figure it out from there. But you gotta start, and it can be intimidating starting when you don't know where to start.
I think that's so important, Vanna, because a lot of people will just say, they'll look at their end score on the practice test and say, oh, okay, well, I got a 640, so I know I can do this, and I'll probably get a really good score when I do it, without studying anymore for it. And
Yep.
That's not what you look at, not the total score on that, but how did you do in each section and what section you need to work on.
Yep, I love that.
I'm glad you.
On the flip side, I know people who take that first one and they get a 490 and they say, this is not for me. And
Yeah, they do.
don't even start because they feel like they can't do it, as opposed to accepting that you haven't interacted with this stuff in 8-10 years.
Yeah.
Maybe you just need that refresher, but you have a place to start. So love that. Okay, so in terms of select section order, would you advise candidates to start with their weaker sections first? For example, verbal, or save that for last? Very similar to what Eileen just said. So we introduced select section order more as an opportunity for candidates to, as I'm stealing from Eileen, show their ability and not their anxiety. And so we learned that could be a hiccup or an obstacle for candidates, just depending on your style. And so through our investigation, we didn't see where it would impact the score or scoring outcomes to change the order. So we allowed you to do that. So the examples that I give is, if you know of yourself that you're a person who you are hit the ground running person. So you start out at 100 and then you find that maybe your energy fades over the course. You might want to start with the more challenging sections first to take advantage of the energy or the momentum you have starting out. Or maybe you're a person who you need to build confidence as you go. So you like to work through things, build your confidence over time. So you may start with the sections that you feel most comfortable with first, build some confidence, and then move forward through your exam. But what I would suggest is downloading the GMAT prep software and trying different scenarios. And I've heard from multiple people who've used select section order in the prep stage. Multiple people have told me that they've seen as much as 30% increases, not 30%, sorry, 30 points increases. Now, what I'm not saying or suggesting is you can full on expect 30-point increase. I am saying that, going back to that, how anxiety and things like that do play a part, and there are other things that can sometimes impact the score. We're looking to remove those things as much as possible. So play around with it. There's no recommended order. We don't have any data that suggests one order leads to better scoring outcomes than another. So it's really about preference. Any other thoughts?
That's exactly what I would have said.
Okay.
And again, the information that we have on section select order is anecdotal, and people are playing to their preferences. The original research showed that it doesn't really matter which order you take them in. So like Vinay said, whatever makes you feel more comfortable is the order that's the best for you.
Yep. Okay. Someone's asking if you could give advice. The way I take this question is, if there's one thing to focus on, or the most important thing to focus on as it relates to the exam, what would you say it is? Is that timing? Is it someone saying resolving the easiest questions first, which really isn't
You can't do that.
There's no possibility for that with the GMAT exam because you can't go back. But just removing the options that were given, is there one thing you had to focus your effort towards? Well, what would it be if you could isolate?
I would say that timing is probably the thing that would trip up people the most. in terms of, and in terms of the way that the timing works and the way that adaptive algorithm works and so forth, people don't want to, and you said, they can't do the easiest questions first and come back. And so people get hung up on the fact that they have to answer that question, and it's gonna, be the adaptive algorithm is, if they get it wrong, it's gonna ruin the rest of the test. And that's just not true. So, one of the things I generally speaking, I usually say timing is really important, because the people do get hung up on that question and they think they have to answer it right in order for it, or they're going to ruin the rest of their test. And so I would say, no, focus on the timing. Trust that the algorithm is going to come back to whatever it is your true score is, even if you get that one wrong. And so that's the reason why I say timing is important, is because you shouldn't get so hung up on one question that it's going to affect your ability to really consider the questions that come next. And so that's my personal opinion. And again, the other things are personal preferences and so forth. And so I would focus on, when you take your practice test, is it timing that's tripping you up? Because, if you don't get to the last questions, you can't get credit for them. And so if that is what, when you take that practice test, if that's what ends up being your problem, that you haven't finished that section, then definitely focus on that. But not so much that you're checking the timer every 5 seconds. So focus on it, but don't obsess over it.
Okay. Christy, question, would the admissions office only look at the overall score or the scores in each section? And I think you've talked about it, but maybe, and I would think to add to this, is it that you look at that overall score initially and that matters most? Or do you always, as you're looking at a score, look at all the other aspects?
We look at each score, and that's one of the things we put on our evaluation sheet. Okay, total score. Verbal score was what? Quant score was this. IR score was this. And a lot of times it's really interesting that some domestic U.S. students don't do well in the verbal section. You think, And the problem is, and if you go back and you read their essays, sometimes you can figure that out. They're too wordy. They ramble. And one of the things that you're trying to do in the verbal section is to be succinct, precise, and correct. So if you know the English language well, then you can do well on that part. But sometimes the international candidates whose first language is not English can score higher on the verbal part than the American students do, which really always makes me wonder what's going on in schools. But that's another story. But I think that one of the things we do focus on, obviously, is, do you have the verbal skills to be in the program if you're an international student? And the second part is the quantitative and analytical skills. So we probably put a little more weight on the quantitative and IR score than on the verbal, but not so much that it's going to make a huge difference. Again, they all work together to provide a picture of who you are and what you can do. So I don't think the IR is not going to count as much as the quant score and the verbal, but it does count. And I know it's really hard question to answer, because I don't want to say, oh, it depends, but it really does. It depends on your work experience. What have you been doing? Maybe you haven't had any quant classes in your undergrad at all, and yet you're working in a job that requires heavy data analysis. That's going to show up. Does that make sense? I hope that's clear.
But I think you're speaking against what we talked about earlier, and that the admissions teams, they do this for a living. So they know how to manipulate the information to get what they need to know about a potential candidate. So that can vary person to person based on what you bring to the table, what factors they need to consider, and so I don't know. There's no exact answer to it, but I think your answer was a good one.
I think it's important to remind the viewers a couple things that. Oh, Chrissy, am I
No, go ahead.
Something Christy said earlier, and that is that one of the scores can make up for one of the others. And so it's important to realize that the total score is only made up of the verbal and quantitative section, and the IR score and the AWA score gives you extra information. And in addition to that, the schools also get your essay that you've done from the analytical writing section. So Christy said, you know, that you can look at their personal essay, but the schools can also look at the essay that they wrote during the test section, which is a completely different, you know, your personal essay, you have a lot of time to plan and so forth, but the essay that you write under pressure might give a little bit more insight into that, how you express yourself and so forth. And so I've heard anecdotally that each of those different things does impact admissions quite a bit. And like Vinay said, you know, the admissions officers are the experts. They don't use a formula because, you know, then anybody could do it, right? So it's not just one thing. You have to look at each thing individually, and not just each thing individually, but how those things interact, how the IR scores interacts with the quant score, how the verbal score interacts with the essay, and so forth. And so I think it's kind of obvious that each individual piece, not just the GMAT score, but the interviews and the personal statement and the recommendations and so forth, each of those things is going to have a different impact.
Right.
Yep.
And can I add one thing to that?
Sure.
We don't just throw all this stuff out there and say, do this, do this, do this, and then send it in to us. Like we don't have anything better to do than read all these essays and things like that. No, we're asking you to do the essay for a particular reason. We're asking you to get a recommendation because that's the only outside source of information on you other than the GMAT. We're asking you to do the GMAT because we want to know that you have the skills to be able to succeed in the program. And each section, and thank you, Arlene, for mentioning the AWA because we really have overlooked that, but we do read those. And a lot of times we compare them and think, this really does not look like the same writing in the other essay. Isn't that interesting? So be aware that we do read those and we compare them. Because we have a system that checks for fraud, so that gives us an idea of where we might find it.
Love that. I think our CEO always speaks to the art and science of admissions. And I think that I know how frustrating it is as a candidate. You just want to get in those programs, but this thing really is science and it's art. And so there are certain aspects that we might not be able to have a very clear answer for because that's that art piece and it just matters. But you trust the experts that do the admissions. As Eileen said, you trust the science of the exam that you answer these questions, it's going to get back to your true ability. So you kind of got to trust the process to it. We have one more minute here. I got a quick question that I can answer. Do you pay for the exam when you register or when you physically take the test? You pay when you register. So you go to MBA.com to register. You're going to register for an account. You'll register for the exam, and you'll pay everything up front. You'll schedule your date, and then you'll go to the test center that you selected. A lot of the other questions that we got, I think we've answered them in a roundabout way. There is a question on will we do additional sessions? We're always doing sessions like this. So yes, stay tuned. We will talk about other sections of the exam. We may talk about the application process. Just stay tuned to MBA.com to see what events we have coming up next. Christy, Eileen, thank you as usual. It was awesome. I think if it were me, I would have felt good about it. So thank you so much for your time today. Good luck to everyone. Go to MBA.com/surveys. Give us some insights for a chance to win $50. And please, 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 this is one part of the application process. Don't overthink it. Do what you need to do to relieve the stress. Put your best foot forward. Good day, good luck, and thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks.